light casting. Hi, sweet souls. Welcome to I'm Awake, Now What? A podcast investigating the intersectionality of spirituality, healing, and personal development. I'm your host, Chris Iziomata. Rack up some good karma by leaving a 5-star rating, and write a review if you're enjoying the show, and tell your friends about it. This week I sit down with award-winning author, keynote speaker, and vulnerable storytelling expert, Meagan O'Nan. Meagan opens up about going on a spiritual expedition to find her spiritual home after coming out. She shares her wisdom about shedding labels and the identities society puts on us. She talks about how vulnerability starts with honesty, and how when we are vulnerable, we give permission to those around us to be vulnerable in return. She ends with important points on self-acceptance, courage, through telling our stories. Hi, Meagan. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you today and talk about your books and all of the wonderful work that you're doing in the world. This podcast is investigating the Venn diagram of spirituality, personal development, and healing. I'm always curious about everybody's early childhood experience with religion or nothing at all, and then bring us present day to what you're practicing and where you're grounding yourself as an adult.
I grew up in Mississippi and raised Catholic. And I remember when I was really young, always just having a fascination with the spiritual world, but only having a context as big as my experience was. And if you weren't Catholic growing up in Mississippi, you were Baptist. You know, growing up, I was definitely, if you were Catholic, you were kind of considered the oddball of the Christian community because there were so few of us. So I already entered this world of feeling very different than my peers. Like the Catholic kids would all sit together at lunch and all the other kids would sit together at lunch. And there was just this handful of us that actually existed in our public school system. But I was just a very curious kid growing up and always asking my mom the hard questions like, you know, what happens to us after we die? And, you know, after we die, does time end? And if time ends, then what happens? And so I was always going to this place of just questioning the vastness of who we are as spiritual beings and just being very curious and also very like almost afraid, almost scared of that existence and what that meant. And so I had a really tough time being in a church that seemed to define things in a way that were finite. I struggled with, you know, having to confess my sins to a man. You know, like, why couldn't I just talk to God about the things I was struggling with? Like, why did I have to go to a priest and confess? And why weren't women in the church? Why weren't women in leadership in the church? Why did you have to be a nun in order to, you know, be a spiritual leader within the church? And so I just really struggled with a lot of things, concepts of the Catholic Church. I really appreciated the ritual of it, and I thought that was very beautiful. But I definitely felt this kind of downtrodden. It gave me just kind of this perspective of constantly being told that you're a sinner, not feeling like worthy of God's love. Just these messages that didn't feel good to me at all. And so when I finally left Mississippi many years later, I was able to explore other ways of thinking and other ways of doing things. First started like going to a Catholic church. It was called like the American Catholic Church. And there was a gay priest, an openly gay priest. And so that was kind of like my first step. And then I ended up going to like a Unity church in Miami when I lived in Florida. That just blew open my mind. And I started reading Don Miguel Ruiz and Eckhart Tolle and Wayne Dyer and all of these amazing books. I just could not get my hands on enough information, and everything started to kind of click for me spiritually because I just felt like God was so much bigger than one context of one church and one way of thinking. So I just explored everything. I explored Buddhism. I explored, you know, Native American spiritualities. I've explored Taoism and Sufism. And, you know, I've read about everything that I could get my hands on, which eventually led me to a spiritual center. When I eventually moved to Colorado, I ended up at a spiritual center, and the spiritual center kind of embraced all ways of thinking. And I was like, oh, this is it. This is my spiritual home. This makes sense. Like, why can't we just talk about all the things? Took some great meditation classes and all these incredible classes. And so that experience led me to eventually really actually writing my first book, Creating Your Heaven on Earth, where I feel we're all one with God. God is within us, in our hearts. I'm kind of at this place now in my spiritual life where I just tune in to that part of me. And I don't have a context for what God is to me. It's everything. It's my life, it's my choices, it's, listening to my heart, it's connecting with other people. And so to me, I don't have like this is what I believe. It's more of a way of life and just kind of how I move through the world and how I see the world, and just really believing that life is on my side and good things are going to happen. And yeah, tough things are going to happen, but I know I'll get through it, and just really trusting the process of everything that's happening around me is kind of where I'm at right now. And just being at peace with that and trying to keep myself at bay from trying to control anything. So it's definitely a dance. I'm always learning and growing, but at this point, it feels pretty solid that I feel very grounded in that I believe in the best of life. And I'm really just practicing meditation, exercise, connecting with others, just doing the things in my life that make sense for me, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very common, I would say, spiritual expedition people take on this show that come to it. We have all dove headfirst into a lot of different religions and ideologies, trying to search for the answer that you said you came to, which is realizing, there's really not anything that separates us from divinity. Right. And our purpose here is to stay connected to that and to ourselves. And I grew up in a fundamentalist Catholic experience that really really set me off a course. And everything you said back there really resonates, especially the inability to question the finiteness of it. And the growing up, there were just core things that I was always worried about, like my soul. If I died, I was always like, will I go to heaven today? I don't know. I'm not real sure if today if I was hit by a bus today. I mean, I haven't done anything particularly bad. And, I'm having this thought when I'm like 10, it's like, what would I have done at 10? It's really interesting. And I think a lot of us have that experience growing up in weird religious experiences, where also the disconnect from ourselves, the disassociation from ourselves because of the idea that we're sinful inherently. I think that is so damaging to grow up with those ideas and those thoughts embedded into your system so early. I know for me that took a lot of undoing, and it's real interesting, that healing process we all have to go through to let that go, let that piece of it go. Yeah. You've written like a couple books, and I know you have another one coming out in January, but for the purpose of this interview, we're going to be talking about your first two books. And so the first book is Creating Your Heaven on Earth, Unveiling the Truth of What Was Always There, which is such a beautiful concept in the experience of unbecoming and becoming on this path of humanity and spirituality. I think we all do uncover what was already there, which is such beautiful wholeness and light. In terms of this journey in this book and all of the collective thoughts you put into it, thinking about your identity shift through all of that, and really discovering at the end of it what was always there for you.
Oh, good question. When I was writing this book, I was in a really bad relationship, and I was living in Colorado at the time, and I would spend my evenings in the basement writing this book. I was writing my way towards what I wanted. I knew what my beliefs were at that point, that I really believed that you could create the life you wanted on this earth. I really, truly believed in that deep down, but I was not at all in that place when I was writing this book. This book was the thing that got me out of that relationship and started me on my career path of being a writer and a speaker and doing the work that I'm doing in the world still. So this book was what I knew to be true. And it was also the thing that got me towards taking those steps of having the life that I knew I wanted to have. And so that's how it was birthed. I knew I always wanted to be a writer and speaker, and I had written other things before this book was published, but this was the one that kind of got legs of its own and found a publisher pretty quickly, and just felt very fortunate. I was young when I wrote it. So it was just this, it has a special place in my heart, because it really got me started on my path in creating the life that I wanted for myself. The book is about those beliefs that I talked about earlier when I was answering your previous question, about believing in the best of life, believing in the God inside of me instead of the sinner inside of me, and believing in our connectedness as a human species and our connectedness to nature, and just the basic laws of spirituality that I was learning over the years as I was, dissecting all of these great spiritual books. This book was the beginning of my spiritual journey. It propelled me forward into this life that I'm still living. I don't know if I answered your question. I think you were talking about identity, but
Yeah. So who were you at the end of that book?
and I'll backtrack a little bit just
Okay.
for the people who don't know me. When I was in college at Mississippi State University, I came out of the closet as a gay woman, and I had a really tumultuous experience with my spiritual community where I was basically cast out. And I ended up leaving Mississippi because of just really hard experience to exist in a culture where I was only a label. My only identity to the people around me was being a gay woman. And I wasn't being seen as a person anymore. I wasn't being seen for kindness or my hard work or who I was deep down or as a friend. I didn't feel seen at all by my community anymore, or by my culture, or by my society. And so I really felt forced to leave to go and find myself, which really sent me on this spiritual journey. After I wrote this book, it was 5 years after coming out of the closet. I think for me, I was really searching for not only self-worthiness, I was searching for what my identity was beyond my label of just being gay.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't know, I didn't have anyone to go talk to and say to me, hey, Meagan, this is who you are. And it's okay. I didn't have people say, it's all right to be who you are. Like I had to go figure all of that out on my own. I didn't have the support or people along the way cheering me on. And so it was just really hard work for me. And so this book really got me to this place feeling I had written something for myself. I had done this piece of work for myself, and that it was really starting to hit home for me who I was because of it. And that I was so much bigger than my identity. I was so much more than my labels. That part of me was really starting to come forth, and it was starting to scratch the surface of really understanding the power beyond my own labels. And so, like I said, this was just the beginning. This was the catapult that set me on my path forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting. My next question is, there's a lot of, I think, exposure that you would have to be doing at that point, coming out, and then like you said, finding ways to integrate and discover who you really are, and also sharing that with the people in your ecosystem. And I can imagine that was a very hard time in your life. One of the topics you talk about a lot is vulnerability and the power of being vulnerable through storytelling. And so I'm curious about what stories you were telling yourself about being vulnerable to your ecosystem and how you had the courage to continue to speak your truth, and as you were forging your path, which I think was probably happening a lot in parallel as you were unpeeling and becoming and all of those things.
Yeah, there's so many layers there.
Yeah.
I think for me, just the most vulnerable thing at the time was, especially after coming out, was just being honest about who I was as a gay person. That was the hardest, most challenging, most vulnerable thing I could do, was say to someone who asked me, hey, so are you still seeing a woman? Especially people who I knew were vehemently against me being gay and wanted me to not go to hell. Actually saying yes was the hardest thing for me to do at the time. After I left Mississippi, it was a little bit easier because I wasn't like under the pressure of being in a place that I had been from and as an athlete and, society and all of that. And it was a little bit easier for me to be myself from the get-go in these new places that I ventured to. So I lived in Florida, and then I lived in Colorado. And in Colorado, I wrote my first book. I met my wife in Colorado. I got to a point in my life where I knew that if I didn't come back to Mississippi, that I wasn't going to be able to heal from my experience of coming out. I knew I wanted to be vulnerable in the world, and I knew I wanted to share myself, and I knew I wanted to share my heart, but I knew I couldn't do those things fully until I faced my past. I came out in 2004, and in 2010, I just had this vision of coming back to Mississippi, and I decided to come back, and my wife came with me. Having never been to the South at all, I learned very quickly that I thought I was in a very confident place when I came back, and I learned very quickly that I was not at all. I was, when we first moved here, I hid my wife from my landlord. So I made him think that it was just me living in the house. I completely lied about her existence because I was so afraid that if he found out, that he would kick us out. I remember just it being so very challenging to introduce her as my partner or as my girlfriend at the time. We weren't married yet. We didn't get married to 2014. Those first few years, the most vulnerable thing for me to do was to be honest. And that's where it began. And that's where the baby steps really started. Time went on. I decided to really use my voice. And so I started a blog. It was called Everyone's Gay. And I started talking about my experiences of being gay, what my coming out experience was like, what my daily experience was like. And I started sharing it with the community here in Mississippi. And it became very popular. I ended up speaking on stage a lot during that time period. I ended up being on the news a lot. They would call me when there was a gay rights issue. I would come on and be a guest on the local news station. I'd go on Mississippi Today and be on Mississippi Public Radio. And so I became this voice for the LGBTQ community for many years because everyone else was scared to be a voice because they were afraid they were going to lose their job or they were going to lose some relationships or whatever it may be. And throughout that experience, what I did was I approached everything from a place of, this is my story, this is my experience, this is how I've been hurt. And I opened up the conversation for people to have a conversation with me. I wasn't there to blame. I wasn't there to say, this is right, this is wrong. I was just very vulnerable in how I told my story. And I just opened my heart to people. And so vulnerability became the thing that not only healed me, but it opened the door for conversations to have with other people. So I got to kind of relive all of these experiences all the time. And they were scary every time. Don't get me wrong. It was super scary. But vulnerability is the thing that really got me to a place of feeling like now here in 2022 that I feel like I'm in a very healed place. I can tell these stories from a very healed place. The storytelling piece has been the thing that has absolutely saved me and taught me more about God and spirituality and connection with others than anything else has. So I'm very passionate about it. And I truly believe that if we allow ourselves to share our hearts, that people will meet us there, because I've seen it time and time and time again over the years. So it is a super important topic to me to talk about and advocate for.
Yeah, sometimes vulnerability can feel so scary because you're expressing exactly what you feel. And I think we're very used to, as a society, giving either half of it or sort of a very sterilized version of what we're feeling. But I have also found too in my experience, and I wonder if you found this in this process, is the more vulnerability we exert, the more we see from the people we're interacting with. It's almost like there's some indirect and unspoken message that gets shared there, and then they feel safe to be vulnerable back with you, which I think is really beautiful.
Absolutely. It is a powerful thing. I think what happens is, and I'd love to hear your opinion too, is, we get scared of being hurt if we're vulnerable. We get scared of not being seen when we're vulnerable. I don't know if that's been your experience too, but it takes courage, and it's hard to put yourself out there and to let yourself be seen and let yourself be loved, because what we talked about earlier, we're taught in church, we're taught in religion that we are not worthy and that we're not good enough. And so it really lays that foundation for getting to this point in our life where, like, God, I'm just so tired of not feeling good enough. I'm so tired of not feeling worthy. Like, those beliefs have to shift at some point, and the only way to shift them is to do the opposite.
Yeah, unfortunately, there is always the risk that people are not going to be able to meet you and your vulnerability where you are. I think that that's the calibration you make, but I guess to the listening audience would always encourage them just to continue to be vulnerable. And then if people can't accept it or meet it or hold it with some compassion and some grace, then that's okay. The point is getting comfortable with trying to share your vulnerability and giving words and expression to our lived experience is so important. I think there's just, there's a lot of systemic things that our culture, our American culture, but, globally too, I think you can apply it. We want to sweep everything under the rug, and trauma and painful experiences, all of those don't get resolved. They do continue to manifest. Like, people sometimes think, and I say this often on the show, is like there's this perception that it's harder to address what hurts us than it is to face it. And it's exact opposite. It's almost easier to address it and then not have to deal with the fallout, and then the byproducts of that, which is, you know, speaking your truth and being vulnerable and courageous and curious and compassionate. All those things tend to go hand in hand with the healing process that allows us to integrate ourselves, but then also have more compassion for the world around us, because then we can see with like really clear eyes what everyone else is going through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I love that you said that, you know, it's that point where acceptance is the first step, right? Like we have to see things for what they are.
Yeah.
And I tell people this all the time who are really scared to share their stories, because I work with speakers who speak on stage, and helping them with their own stories and sharing their own vulnerable stories. And I'm just like, look, if anything, do this for yourself, because in voicing the experience, it helps you accept the experience even more. It helps you ground yourself in that experience, and it's healing for you, if anything. And there's no way that sharing our hearts isn't going to be healing for someone in the audience. If you speak your truth, you're doing it for yourself, no matter the response that you get from other people. It's so worth it.
And I find that the common theme and thread through the self-acceptance journey with everyone who's come here and with my own, there's these two parts. It's having resonance for other people and giving them space to say me too, but also it's about being able to just, I guess, how do I want to say it? It's like being able to accept yourself so deeply that nothing can ever break your own self-acceptance through that process. And it's just, it can't be overstated, I don't think.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I feel you.
Yeah. And so in that vein, your agree to disagree, if people read that book, which I have not, in full disclosure, but the blurb on the back of your book also talks about the self-acceptance piece, but also not wanting to fix ourselves. And I think that's a really big cultural norm that has been cascaded to us for generations, that especially with women, that there's something wrong with us, you know, and that there's some final destination that we need to be thinner, smarter, richer, you know, more pleasant, like all the things. There's a plethora of things. You can just fill in the blank for whatever your situation is now. How did you come to that realization that you are whole, you don't need to be fixed? And what do you hope to tell people in that book about that?
I think the wholeness journey is definitely one that continues. You know, kind of what I talked about earlier is just like all of these little baby steps of vulnerability, I think, is the one thing that's gotten me to this place in my life where, okay, I feel okay. Like I'm okay. Everything's okay. I'm okay. And it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was the little things of being honest about myself and introducing my wife as my wife to a stranger that I don't know. It's the, you know, showing up and being honest about how someone's hurt me and having those hard conversations. And it's, you know, saying yes to those interviews that really scared me, but I knew I had to do it for myself and for my community. You know, it's all of those little things over the years that have added up to this point in my life where I feel like, okay, I'm fine. Everything is okay. And I'm going to be okay no matter what happens. From here on out, I'm going to survive it and I'm going to be okay. And I'm going to know deep down that everything is fine.
Is that influenced by Eckhart? Because I feel like that's where I got that okayness from.
Well, The Power of Now was a really life-changing book for me because that concept
that one
was
changed
so
my life
new.
for sure.
Yeah. It was a major game changer for me. I talk about it in my new book. Courage, Agreeing to Disagree is Not Enough, which was my second book. That was written in 2014. And that really stemmed from a place of marriage equality was a topic of conversation. And I was being asked to go on new show after new show after new show to have these debates with people about marriage equality. If you know me well, you know I'm not a debater. I'm a connector. And I'm going to find a way to try to bridge the gap. And I was honestly just really sick of people saying, hey, Meagan, it's fine if you want to be gay, but you know, I don't agree with you getting married. And it was just always this message from people who I thought had unconditional.
There was always an asterisk.
Yeah, there was always a, I love you, but I don't agree with your lifestyle. Or I love you and Claire, but I don't agree with you guys getting married. And so I was just tired of the getting to this point in conversations where you have to agree to disagree, because then you don't get anywhere. You don't go beneath the surface. You don't talk about what you're really feeling. You don't talk about why you feel the way you feel about something. And so this book was kind of it was a healing thing for me to write. It was a lot of my own personal experiences, some of the challenges I was facing at the time, not feeling, I was scared to get married. I was afraid of taking that step. I was nervous about telling everyone that we wanted to get married. And so it was just a really hard time for me because of the conversation was always stopping. Let's just agree to disagree. And I just wanted more. I wanted more from people. I wanted to have those hard conversations. I wanted to communicate. I wanted to understand why people felt the way they did. I wanted them to understand me and what I was going through. And the only way that was going to happen was if I put myself out there first. And so that's what this book was. It was that next step towards wholeness. It was me just being honest about how I felt when people would say things like that to me about not agreeing with who I was or whatever. So it was just another part of my healing journey, that book. And I wanted to challenge people to think beyond just the one thing that they might be believing in that moment, that political view or that opinion, and really start to see people for who they are beyond those things.
Yeah, you said so many important things back there. And having grown up in a fundamental religious experience, people being gay, we were told from day one was a sin and they were going to hell and all of the things. And for me, I'm straight, but when I went on my own journey, that was one of the things that I really wanted to understand and investigate. And like, why are we just siphoning a whole set of people to this end that just is unbelievably sad and painful? And I could not reconcile at the end of the day when I got to the other side of it, was just thinking like, the baseline is that we're all human. That is the baseline. Yeah. Strip away our identities. If we're not all treating one another as human beings with the exact same level of respect and regard and access to things, then that's wrong, and I feel like this idea of going beyond the threshold of agreeing to disagree is incredibly important and very hard work, because of how indoctrinated and how unquestioning people are about their ideas. I know I was too. I say that with knowing I was like that too. When I was young, that's what I believed because that's what I was told to believe. And I have family members who still believe that and believe it without inquiry and question and curiosity. So I think it's so important to have this discussion about coming across that threshold of agreeing not to disagree. And like you said, bridging the gap. I feel like it's so important because it feels like these last 5 years we've, in America at least, but also in Europe and a lot of other places, that we've backtracked all of this progress. And as a gay person, I can't imagine what that is feeling like. And I don't know, I would probably be stressed all the time. As a woman, I'm stressed about, my reproductive rights. But I mean, where do you see us going in this direction? Where do you see the pockets of light and, I would say, expansion that we might have some hope on the horizon, that we can pivot in the right direction again?
Interesting. We live in an interesting time. I think COVID really added to the fear that was already in motion. I think it collectively put us all in a position to feel like, oh my God, I have absolutely no control over anything, which means more fear. I don't know. I surround myself with people who have a very positive outlook, I would say. I feel like I'm kind of in this bubble in some ways, but that's on purpose too. I have a lot of hope. I really do. I feel like things are made to be worse than they actually are.
Yeah, definitely in the media.
Yeah. And I don't believe that the Supreme Court represents who we are as a collective. No. I really, truly do not believe that at all. And so I have faith in that. I have faith in us as a people and in faith in us as a collective, that we will continue to push and have forward motion and embrace love and light. I mean, I just truly believe it in my core. Now, I'm not going to say that the Supreme Court decision on abortion didn't scare the shit out of me for my own marriage equality rights, because it did. I mean, it absolutely terrified me. I cried for days. If marriage equality gets overturned, I'm taking my family and I'm moving to Europe, or I'm going somewhere where I know we're going to be accepted, because I'm not dealing with it again. Like, there's that part of me that absolutely wants to run away from it if that happens. I have my own bouts of fear, but I just worked my way through it. I cried. I talked to the people that I love and worked through it the best way I could. So now I'm just not putting any energy on that happening. As people who want the best to happen in the world, we have to just stay in the energy and have a vision for what we know to be true and what we want to be true. That's all we can do, is just put our attention on our little ecosystems, our lives, our loved ones, the people, our relationships, put all the love we can into that. And that's what will magnify out. That's what will ripple out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really all we can do.
Yeah. I do also feel I'm very much an optimistic person too. And I try to be clear-eyed about my optimism as well, because in spirituality that can turn into materialism and bypassing. But I do also feel that the way I sort of see it, a 50,000 foot view, it feels like the last sort of agitation against a new paradigm. Like that's what it feels like too. Like it's so uncomfortable, it's so crazy, but it's almost like everyone has to get their last say out about it. And then we need to move to, and I do believe as well, I'm with you with this idea that we have to envision an earth where we are all equal, a footing, period. Otherwise we're not going to survive. We will self-implode essentially. But that we have to envision this future, but these rumblings and these hardships and these challenges, and they are real. I mean, these things are real. We're facing it every single day. It's like this last agitation against what's possible. And again, I know that sounds probably very Pollyanna, but that's how I see it too. I feel like it's almost like, and to simplify it is like, taking 2 steps back and taking 1 forward. Right now we're in this process of stepping back, and I think we're going to pivot or propel ourselves forward exponentially is what I'm hoping for sure.
Yeah, I agree. There'll always be some contrast on some level, always. I mean, that's part of the human experience, but...
Yeah, and especially because we don't all believe the same thing.
Exactly. And it's not a bad thing, it's okay. It's what makes us look at ourselves and think about who we are and what we want. The time we're in has forced us to have those hard conversations and to look at the people around us and talk about the things that matter. I think it's been absolutely 1,000,000% necessary for everything to have happened in these last 4 or 5 years. I mean, we've had to have these conversations, and it has changed for the positive in a lot of ways. I mean, I've seen it in my dynamics and the people around me and in our culture here in Mississippi. Things are definitely changing.
And the way you see like corporations and organizations stepping up for LGBTQIA plus people is, sometimes people make fun of it because it's like, oh, it's June, you're going to put your flag out or whatever. But that they're even taking that stance, even if it feels very cheesy, it's huge compared to where we were even 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah. No comparison at all.
And at least they're having the courage to align themselves and become allies, even if it's just, there's still so much work to do, but really big.
I agree. Many, many, many steps forward. And so we just have to stay focused on those forward steps and try not to stay stuck and like, but we're not there yet. Because, we're always going to be struggling against that in some form or fashion, because there will always be contrast.
Yes. Getting close to the end here, I did want to ask you one other question here, which is sort of a theme that rolls through your books, but definitely you hit on it a lot in your second book, which is courage. I wondered for you, what is your definition of courage? How do you practice it daily? And what do you want to say to the listening audience if they're struggling to find their own courageous spirit within themselves?
Oh, good question. I would say courage to me is just being true to yourself. That's everyday work, right? I mean, am I making decisions today that are going to make me who I want to be tomorrow? That's the best work you can do. It's the best work I can do, is to constantly evaluate, am I being who I want to be in the world? Am I showing up for my almost 4-year-old daughter and being the parent I want to be? Am I showing up for my wife and being the partner I want to be? Am I being the daughter I want to be to my parents? Am I supporting them? And so I think if you look just at your relationships that you are surrounded with and you step forward to be the best version of yourself for those relationships, I really feel like that's a very strong foundation where you can find wholeness and where you can find meaning and where you can find just the basis of all the things that you want to do with your life going forward. So that's where I really try to focus. When I think about courage, I think about those hard conversations that I need to have when my wife hurts my feelings, or when my mom says something or my dad says something that doesn't line up with what I need or what I want, actually saying something about it and having a conversation about it and moving forward with it, that's courage to me. It's just those moments in life that we just glaze over because we're always got our eye on something bigger or better. But it's those little things, to me, those courageous baby steps that add up to the life that you really do want. And that's what we all want, which is just a meaningful, fulfilling life where we feel whole.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's those things that matter. That's where courage really comes into play. It's not the big, huge, go save someone from a fire, courageous, heroic thing. Those
Yeah.
are great, but let's do the things that really matter in our day-to-day life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, the second to last question is just like your social media plugs. If you have any speaking engagements you want to talk about or any courses you have coming up that you want to share with people and how everyone can connect with you online and where you hang out most.
My website is really kind of houses everything. MeaganO'Nan.com, MEAGAN ONAN.com. So you can find all my social, all my information, everything I'm up to. I feel like I'm up to a lot. So my book is coming out in January. I'm just launched a speaking program for people who are aspiring speakers with a talent agency. Actually, they represent me, Talent Concierge. They represent me. And so we partnered up and we're doing a online speaking course that is going to be amazing. And so we're launching that on October 30th. And so we've got that going on and kind of a lot in the works. A lot's going on. It feels a little bit of a whirlwind right now, but all exciting, all fun stuff.
Beautiful. And I always like to end with some gratitude and check in with you about 3 things you're grateful for today, this moment, this week, this year, sort of whatever's stuck in your heart chakra right now.
Oh, well, I'm really grateful for my work right now. I feel so lucky to do what I get to do every day. So I work with incredible people. So today I'm feeling really, really grateful for that. I'm also really grateful for my little family, my daughter and my wife. And we had a hard morning this morning because she didn't want to get dressed and go to school, but it doesn't matter because I just love her so much. And I'm just so grateful for those two. So I'm really grateful for that. And then I'm also just really grateful for my home and where we live. It's just so gorgeous. And I just feel very, very lucky to have such a beautiful home that just feels like a safe haven.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Safety and shelter are the best.
Yes, definitely helps.
Yeah. Well, I had a wonderful time with you today, and I will definitely put all of your links in the podcast show notes for people to fly over to grab your books on Amazon and your website and links to your social media over there. But thank you for coming to the show. I think this was a beautiful conversation. It'll give people a lot of things to think about for how to be courageous in their lives and how to step into their own truth and go on that path. Like you said, that's what we're all here to do, basically.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the great questions. I really appreciated the conversation too.
This podcast was written, directed, and produced by me, your host, Krista Ziomata, in alignment with Light Casting. Music curated and created by Mr. Pixie. You can find I'm Awake Now What on all social media channels by searching IANW Podcast. Head over to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, download, rate, and review. Come back every Sunday to partake in a new and enlightening conversation. May you be filled with love and light until we meet again.